Fáilte. Welcome to this episode of The Language Question, Ceis na Tongan, a conversation about the Irish language and its history for anyone curious about their relationship with it and its role in our identity. First off in this episode, I just want to say thanks once again to everybody who entered our great draw for the Thesaurus Gaeilgeoir by Gary Bannister and New Island Books, and I want to thank Gary and New Island Books for providing us with a very generous copy of the Thesaurus for our draw. The lucky winner of our draw from last episode, you will recall, was Siobhan Ní Giollarnáith, and I'm delighted to say that we've been in touch with Siobhan and her copy of the Thesaurus is winging its way to her. Now, if you entered in the draw and you didn't win a copy of the Thesaurus, don't worry. We have another wonderful opportunity for you to get a heavily discounted copy of the Thesaurus if it is something that you're interested in. And it's a book that I highly recommend. It's one that I purchased for full price in my local bookshop long before the interview with Gary was arranged. But it's an excellent publication and the ideal Christmas present for any Gaeilgeoir in your life apart from yourself, and even buy it as a present to yourself. Well, what we have for you is a 30% discount. New Island Books have very generously agreed to provide us with a 30% discount for listeners of the podcast, and that discount will last from today until our next episode releases, which will be on the 12th of December. So you'll have an opportunity now over the next couple of weeks to get a copy of the Thesaurus Gaeilgeoir at a 30% discount on the list price. The code to obtain your discount is The Language Question, all capital letters, The Language Question 30. That's 30. So the number's 30 after The Language Question, all in capital letters, is the code. To get access to your discount on the book, you need to go to the New Island website, newisland.ie. And if you click on the link to books there on the menu bar at the top of the page, and it will take you to the books page. Down at the bottom there's a link to Lawer as Gaeilge. Click in there and you will see the Thesaurus there. Click on it, and Chuir sa Chart is the button to select. Put that into your shopping basket, Chuir sa Chart, and then once you've done that, if you go to the cart, you will go to your shopping basket and go to checkout, and you will then see in the checkout page, you will see a box there to add a gift or discount code. Pop in there, The Language Question 30. So it's letters, The Language Question 30, numerals 30, and all capital letters, and then hit apply, and that should apply your discount code. It will be available from today, 28th of November, up until the 12th of December. So please do make use of that and get access to that excellent publication at a serious discount for the benefit of our listeners here on the show. One of the many benefits that you get for listening to The Language Question. Okay, our guest in this episode is Caoimhe Nic Giollarnáith. Caoimhe is originally from Kildare and now lives in New York via Galway. She is on the faculty of Irish Language and Literature at Lehman College in New York, having previously taught at Fordham University. And she is also an Irish teacher at the Irish Arts Centre in New York and in the New York Irish Centre. As always, I hope that you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. I'd also really appreciate your feedback on the show. I would really appreciate it if you would follow, rate and review the show on Apple or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And please also be sure to sign up at thelanguagequestion.com/resources to get your complimentary valuable learning resources and to ensure that you stay up to date with upcoming episodes, guests, and to receive exclusive content. Anyhow, here goes with this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Come win it two soltas. Caoimhe Nic Giollarnáith is originally from Kildare and now lives in New York City via Galway. She is on the faculty of Irish Language and Literature at Lehman College, having previously taught at Fordham University in New York. She is also an Irish teacher at the Irish Arts Centre in New York and the New York Irish Centre. Caoimhe a cara tá fáilte is fitheóra ar an show agus tá thar bheith buíochtaíoch as a bheith.
Gur míle mágat a inní.
Well, Caoimhe, genuinely, it is a huge pleasure to have you here on the show with us, and we're really looking forward to our conversation here today. And what I'd love to do, Caoimhe, just to get us started, as I do with all of our guests here on the show, is to just go back to the beginning and to your background in the language, what that looked like when you were growing up, where you came from, let's say, in relation to it in your childhood and family background, and how your relationship with language progressed from there.
So I grew up in Leixlip, County Kildare, 20 minutes from Dublin. And my father and a couple of his friends founded the local Irish language primary school. So my siblings were the first to go there, Scully Gauley, named after Caoimhe Gaullarnáith, one of our former presidents. Um, so, yeah, I was sent to school there when I was 4. And I don't really remember speaking Irish outside of school except with my father and my siblings. Um, I learned like my prayers and things like that through Irish. Even though my mother isn't fluent, she made a big effort to teach me all of that through Irish, and she still would tell me not to forget my Gansey when I'm going out the door. Um, so yes, there was Irish at home, but I didn't feel proud to speak it outside of school, and I don't think any of my friends did. So that was interesting. And then when I went to secondary school, it was the
And
same
just to
thing.
clarify there, Caoimhe, on that, in terms of just saying you didn't feel proud to speak it outside of school, would that include speaking it at home, or just you mean
No, it
outside of
didn't
the?
bother me to speak it at home.
Okay.
No, just outside. Um, like we would. I remember. I think I encountered more of my fellow classmates in secondary school who would have come from families that only spoke Irish. And it felt a bit extreme to me at the time. And now, obviously, I view that differently. But it was interesting. I guess, though, it was unique insofar as, like, I grew up around some of kind of well-known Irish language activists, their kids, like Ciarán O'Finney and that. So, who at one point he did a demonstration at RTE before ETG Car to try and get Irish language programming more of it, an Irish language television station. So I was kind of exposed to that a bit, which I didn't see in primary school at all, which was interesting. And I remember my first time hearing a native speaker speak it casually in an informal setting when I was at the Oireachtas, which I'd say a lot of your listeners would know, but that's like the Irish language speaking festival, kind of like the FLA, I guess. And for me, it was so nice to see someone my own age speak on the phone to her mother in Irish. It just so naturally. And for some reason, that was different than me hearing the Gaeilgeoir in Dublin, because it wasn't forced and it wasn't making any kind of statement. It just was. So, yeah, that was definitely something I will never forget. And yeah, I think a lot of, I don't know about the shame, I guess, because we would sound different. Like, no one else is speaking Irish except the Gaeilgeoir. But I think part of it was the whole getting in trouble in school for not speaking it. I don't know if I agree with that anymore. Because we used to be terrified, even though we do it anyway. Which is funny. And I remember that even continued in college. Some of our lecturers commenting when we'd be speaking in English. And funnily enough, it'd be with people from the Gaeltacht. So I don't know. Anyway.
A lot
So
going
yeah.
on there, yeah.
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 Yeah. But I'm very fortunate that I had all of my education through Irish. And I do wonder, I think I still would have become fluent, but I don't know how difficult that would have been for me.
But talk to me, just because there's an awful lot in there before we even move on from that at all. But just talk to me in terms of the background there. It was the first Gaelscoil, one of the early Gaelscoils established there in and how long was it established by the time you started going there? Do you remember?
It would have been 12 years.
Okay, so that was quite a that must have been quite something in terms of this is, I know there's been an explosion in the whole Gaelscoil movement in recent years, but I mean that must have been quite a pioneering place at that stage.
I guess it was. To me, it was just school.
Yeah.
But when I look back, like my sister sent me a clip yesterday on that was an RTE, the archives, filmed at the school, and it was interesting to see how things have changed. Showing the prefabs and that, and teachers complaining about the facilities, whereas by the time I got to school there, things had changed a lot and it had grown so much. But yeah, I guess at the time it was, yeah. For my older siblings, it would have been.
And you said that was something. I mean, you were obviously conscious of not using the language outside of school. I mean, how did that then progress, and your relationship with language as you went on through? So, what happened first of all in relation to secondary education? Did you go to Gaeilgeoir, or how did that work?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Cláiste go Sliffe in Lucan.
And how did your relationship with the language? Was that something that did you feel how did you feel about the language as you were growing up? Was it something you were conscious of, or because obviously you've continued in? So I'm just
Yeah.
curious on how that unfolded for you.
I think my Crawford came about in the Leaving Cert. I don't know why. I guess I had a really good teacher when I was in fourth year or fifth year. And I think she just, yeah, I realised that it came naturally to me. I didn't have to study as hard as the other subjects. And I enjoyed that. And it was only actually once I got my Leaving Cert results that for a second I was like thinking it was one of my best results. I thought, maybe there's something here. Maybe I should be an Irish teacher. But I kind of left it at that then. But I guess everything happens for a reason. It came full circle in the end. But it is interesting because, there was 30 in my class and I was the only one who got an A1 in Irish. So I think there's a lot to be said about the syllabus then, if that's the case.
Mm, mm, mm. And so how did that continue? So how did you feel about when so you were motivated and inspired by, let's say, if you like, realizing your own ability and interest in the language, studying it at that point, and that must be very gratifying to experience that. So,
Mm.
so where did you go from the? Did you go on to study Irish at third level then?
Yeah, it was kind of a happy coincidence. The objective was to become an educational psychologist. Irish was never supposed to be part of the picture. I was
Yeah.
always between teaching, and I was thinking primary school, or secondary school and home economics. Hadn't thought about the second subject, and
Hmm.
then psychology. So I went to University of Galway, which was NUIG at the time, and I did an arts degree with the objective of getting into psychology. So, first year I did German, Irish, psychology, and sociology and politics. And then second and third year I did psychological studies in Irish. So it was always just my second subject, but I excelled in it and was encouraged by Garrow Denver to pursue it. And I think that's when I started to think seriously about it. Because before that, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I knew I enjoyed psychology, but I didn't want to work in the field. Um, so it always comes down to a good teacher, I think.
That's a huge theme coming across in many different conversations, and so how did that progress for you in terms of your progress in the language then?
I really applied myself towards the end of final year. And yeah, they were my best results. I got a 1-1. So at that point, I was made aware of Fulbright and opportunities teaching Irish abroad. And I think that's what really ignited my passion and desire in it. I don't know, had I stayed in Ireland, would I have stayed working directly with the language? Because I was always kind of put off by being a secondary school teacher teaching it because of the attitudes that were there on both
Mm,
sides. I felt if I went to Wales school, from my own personal experience, people weren't that bothered about it because I felt they were fluent, even though they're lacking the Severus tongue usually. And then the other side of it, I felt it would be challenging to motivate people to speak it. So I always knew I wanted to travel. Um, and I knew that I was going to get a green card for America because my parents had lived there. So it was just seemed like a natural progression to come to New York and teach here.
hmm. And so how did that happen?
Um, so I got my green card in 2011 and came over and I just started looking into what universities weren't part of Fulbright. And I saw that Fordham University wasn't. So I
Would
was
you mind
for
explaining the Fulbright thing? Because the Fulbright scholarship has kind of cropped up time to time, and I see a lot of, it's a lot of people who kind of come through Sail na Gaeilge have been through Fulbright at some stage. Would you mind just explaining for listeners what is that? And
So it's an academic scholarship. So it's a partnership between the US and the Irish government and language exchange program, where a foreign language teaching assistant will come over from Ireland for 2 semesters to teach Irish, promote the language and culture, and then they'll return to Ireland with their newfound skills, and hopefully be able to bring something back to Ireland with that.
did you go over as a Fulbright scholar
I
or?
didn't. So I
Okay.
was disappointed that I wouldn't be eligible for that because I already had a visa to come to America.
Oh, I
But
see.
luckily, I found a way around that.
Okay.
Um, yeah, which I'm grateful for. So in that sense, I was really really thrown into it because, as the name suggests, like foreign language teaching assistant, you're an assistant. So kind of more like a tutor, even though a lot of the times you will be lecturing on your own. You have kind of someone to guide you. I was just thrown in the deep end. Um, I was filling in for maternity leave positions. So it was interesting in that sense, trying to navigate it all on my own. But I loved it. I was very fortunate to have that experience. And, I was teaching people maybe 2, 3 years younger than me, but they were all so enthusiastic. And yeah, we had so much
And
fun.
so what did that look like? So what was the learners? Who were they? Where were they coming from? What was their background, or was there any kind of common threads there?
So Fordham is a Jesuit university, and it was the first Irish studies program in America. So all of my students would have had some kind of Irish background. A lot of them, several generations back. But I remember one student telling me their grandmother used to say like the Thanksgiving grace in Irish, and he would ask me to translate some things that he found at home, letters and that. So it was interesting.
One thing that I'm just curious about, and I'm not sure if you have experience of this, but one thing that I'm very curious about is the nature of Irish language learners coming from Ireland and who come through the Irish education system and are now coming back maybe at third level or later and trying to learn the language, and people coming from outside of Ireland who haven't been exposed to the Irish education system and don't have all of that baggage to carry around. Do you have any thoughts on what it's like to teach learners of the language outside of Ireland versus here?
So for me, it was just easy. It's just so easy because everyone is so eager and keen to learn, and they're excited. So I loved that, and I still love that. It's such a novelty, um, and it's great. Like, I will say I teach adult learners as well. The older ones, maybe in their 70s, will say that their parents didn't speak it and had a bad attitude towards it. Not They wouldn't say bad attitude. They would say their parents said it didn't exist. It was a dead language. When they learn then when they go to NYU or somewhere like that, that in fact it is a living, breathing language, and a lot of people still speak it. So they would then get really into it. But having these students there, blissfully unaware of the intergenerational trauma and emotional baggage we carry at home, um, was nice. They were very kind of naive about it. But it's great because I think when they don't have that baggage, they progress so much quicker because they're not really scared of anything, of making mistakes or anything like that. Yes, they're scared to speak it, absolutely, because, they're not fluent or whatever, but it's a different type of fear, you know.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, because I think the Irish person who's come through the education system, and there's just so many hang-ups about the language. We're so hard on ourselves in relation to the language. I think
Mm.
sometimes it's ridiculous. But I'm just very curious to see how how the learner coming from outside um, the contrast there. But tell me then, what does their kind of progression look like? I mean, what's your experience? I mean, where do people just do a couple of modules as part of a degree, or do you see people? What level of kind of progression do you
We've
see people taking?
had a few graduates over the years now that have had a minor in Irish studies, so they really enjoyed the language and they continued then with other modules to get, the minor in it. So it's great. The majority, unfortunately, won't have the opportunity to continue with it, but a few will go to the Gaeltacht, which is great. We have a scholarship in partnership with the Octave in Carrow, and we send a student there every year, which is great. They always have a great time. They come back with a lot of Irish, which is fantastic to see. But I mean, a lot of them by the end of it will have conversational Irish. They'll be able to, tell you where they're from, how they're feeling, ask how you are, that kind of thing, which is good for 12 weeks, and a lot of them will be able to master the gloss, which is nice to see. With adults, it's different, with adult learners, it can take a while if they're not strong at languages, but once they kind of maybe have done 2 or 3 courses and they're going to the pop-up Gaeltachts and they're immersing themselves in the language, they can quickly progress, especially if they're listening to Rajin Gaeltachta, watching TV, and that I find that makes a huge difference. And it's just so different when you get rid of the exams, because I have so many Irish students come to my classes from Ireland, and one of them always says it reminds her of home, because we're just having the crack in class and talking about that and culture. Like, it's not just about the language, and I never want it to be about that. I want to be able to understand what it is to be a modern Irish citizen and a Gaeilgeoir.
Yeah, that is really, really interesting. I think you've put your finger on something absolutely vital there, and I'd like to dive into that in a lot more detail, if that's okay. But before I do that, if it's okay, I'd like to just kind of we kind of have jumped around a little bit. So we just in terms of your progression, in terms of career. So what we talked so far about what Irish looks like, Irish looks like for you growing up, and then in education, and then now you're working in the education system teaching Irish in Fordham in New York. So, what does Irish look like for you outside of the education system? Or are there, in the US, are there opportunities to use the language? Do you find it? Do you use it in your life outside of education?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I came straight from college here. So initially it was tough for me because I was so immersed in it in college. I really started to feel comfortable with it because I went to Galway, where you'll hear it spoken on the streets in town and stuff, which is nice. So it was really part of my life, and I was speaking it every day to other Gaeilgeoirí and native speakers. When I came to New York, then I say a lot of Gaeilgeoirí have this experience after college. It's like, okay, now what do I do? Like, where am I going to get these opportunities? So I did start to meet other Gaeilgeoirí, which was great, just from pop-up Gaeltachts and stuff like that. So I have that opportunity. By chance, I started living a few years ago. One of my housemates was from Connemara, which was great. So we still have that connection where I'll talk to him on the phone. He's back in Ireland now. But there are definitely a lot of opportunities if you look for them. There's like a pop-up Gaeltacht every week here. Some organisation or another is doing it. So there's several different ones. I was at Kneecap 2 weeks ago. That was sold out, which was incredible. I was talking to one American who'd come all the way from Florida to see them. So I think there's a lot to be said in that. And there was a big gathering beforehand for pop-up Gaeltacht.
I was actually going to ask you about that because I was just looking at a kneecap were in Rolling Stone just last
Yeah, I
week.
know.
Yeah, and there was a big piece on them and about talking about how they were there. People were singing along Ascoilga, and it seemed to be an extraordinary experience.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And what was surprising to me is how many Irish people I met there who don't speak Irish. And they're usually from the north and they just want to support local talent. Or else they're just Irish and they're into kind of niche music. So yeah, it was really encouraging to see, because I like that they're bringing people that wouldn't necessarily be thinking about speaking Irish into that kind of circle and
Mm-hmm.
community.
Mm-hmm. And speak to me then about, because just in terms of what does the Irish Arts Centre and the New York Irish Centre, how do those kinds of organisations look like in terms of the way in which people engage with the language there or use that? Or what is there a regular kind of context in which people can use the language?
Well, we have the classes in both centres, 3 or 4 terms a year, and there's always such interest in it. Once one course finishes in one place, they want to do another. So it's nice to see that enthusiasm. The New York Irish Centre will have pop-up Gaeltachts, that kind of thing. The Irish Arts Centre have an annual Irish Language Day, Féile Gaeilge, where they will have guests from home come over, like we had on School Scarta last year, which was great, and Moncon McGann the year before. And those days are really popular because it's for all levels, so we'll have a lot of people come with no Irish, and then they'll get into the classes and that, which is great to see.
Yeah, and what does the people who show up at these events? What does that look like? Is it Irish expats who are looking to reconnect, with Irishness and the language abroad, or is it Americans with Irish American heritage maybe coming there, or what is there? Are there kind of groups, let's say, that you could categorize people in?
Yeah, I would say more Irish Americans than Irish, but there'll always be a few. I
Mm-hmm.
was surprised, like at the kneecap gig, how many Irish I've met there that I wouldn't have met in my workspace.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not necessarily going to classes, but they're going to pop-up Gaeltachts and the Irish language events. So yeah, there'd be, the Irish Americans that are coming, and usually they're a couple of generations back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then the Irish expats as well. But it's not, I teach one person on a private basis, and she's a rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
And she got into it through Irish dance. She was interested in Irish dance, loved it, and then realised there was a language, and that's how that all started. So there's different types, and where I teach now at Lehman College, it's a general education subject, so a lot of people have to complete that requirement. It's like a literature course. So the majority of my students won't have that background. They'll be Latin American, Muslim, every kind of nationality, and a lot wouldn't have grown up in America and their parents didn't go to college. So it's interesting to see the mix.
Mm. Mm. And talk to me then, just to come back to that point that you made there about the let's say broader Irish culture and just the nature of what it's like to be Irish in the 21st century, and that's something that you focus on because sometimes you get the impression that, and this is a very hackneyed kind of caricature in many ways, of the Irish American who's coming back to reconnect with Irish. It's in quite a maybe there's a slightly twee image of what the kind of Irish heritage is, whether that's still kind of maybe preserved in amber to a certain extent, or maybe the language is similarly kind of of a certain time and associated with a certain kind of historical past. I mean, how does that kind of come up to date, and how do you connect the student looking for a certain version of Irishness with the modern version that you're kind of retailing?
I've used film a lot
Mm-hmm.
to show the changes that have occurred. Um, so short films usually, and when I show them Yu Ming, they always feel that negativity. I'm like, well, we have to remember that was like over 20 years old now, and things are very different.
Mm-hmm.
Some that have already been following Irish language influencers or on Duolingo are aware how the attitudes have changed and how things are a lot different in Ireland now, and it's a contemporary country, and it's not just people living in the countryside that speak it. So there's two kind of, I find it's always one extreme or the other, where they're very aware of it or they're not. So I'll show them different, like Ruby is a great one. I'll show them that. Yu Ming, like I said, there was one.
And just again for listeners who might be familiar with it, Yu Ming is Anam Dum is that
Yeah.
YouTube a great show. One of my favorite comedic lines of all time, I think, is in Yu Ming is Anam Dum. But the other one you mentioned there, Ruby, what was
Ruby.
that?
So I first saw Ruby at Tribeca Film Festival in New York in 2014, and it was fantastic to see an Irish language film at that. And it was it was sold out. At that point, I didn't know as many Gaeilgeoir as much as community, so I am curious how many people in that audience actually spoke Irish. Were a lot of them just film enthusiasts? So it's about a girl in the Connemara Gaeltacht who lost her father just making her communion. So her relationship with religion and that. But it's just a really beautiful film, regardless of language, which is nice. And I'll show them things like the Carlsberg ad. I don't know if you're familiar with it, like Hunis, Colleen, Boher, Bonya, where your average Irish person will have all these random vocab from secondary school or primary school, and that kind of stops there. So we explore that. But I think by the end of it, when I have them watching TG Carr and that, they realise that it really isn't like just in the Gaeltacht. It's everywhere now. More so even, because as you're aware, I mean, it's under threat in the Gaeltacht, but it's flourishing in the urban setting.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a thing we've come up against again and again, and something that I'd like maybe to explore with you a little bit later on is that whole question, because it's absolutely huge, and I'd particularly like to get your take on that now from the other side of the pond, and what living in the US now for a prolonged period of time, what your perspective on that might be. But maybe just before getting to that, could I just maybe continue on that theme? And I think I'm going to try and dig out links to the various different references that you make here, and we'll have those in the show notes after when we go live. But you mentioned those two, because Ruby I'm not familiar with. You Ming Sanam Dum is a classic. But tell me just in terms of film then, because of course we've had this kind of resurgence of Irish film. I mean, because you mean that's 20 years ago. We've had, but in the last 3-4 years, there's been an extraordinary just renaissance, if there ever was a renaissance to begin with, of Irish language film. It's been accepted. How is that? What's that been like to be part of over there?
I think it's helped tremendously, and it's been really exciting. I moderated a Q&A with the cast of An Colleen Kuhn in February, and to see that sell out in advance was fantastic. And knowing that there were so many Americans in that audience. I mean, it was showing there several times a day, yet 3 Q&As sold out. So to me, that said a lot about where we are now with the language and how it's on the world stage. And then seeing, the cast speaking Irish on the red carpet definitely helped with perception. But it wasn't just on Colleen Kuhn, it was Aracht before that. And Donal O'Haley actually taught with us the Irish Arts Centre for a stint before that came out. So, I do ask that my students watch that as well, and kind of as a dialect test to see if they can identify which dialect's being spoken by the cast and that. And I have found it helpful as a medium for just looking at what happened in the famine and how that translates to modern day and where we're at now. So it's interesting. I just got an email today asking me to do another Q&A where an Irish Goodbye is going to be shown. and to talk about the Irish language in New York at the Irish Rep. So, it just goes to show there's always something happening here, which is really exciting.
And just to be clear, what language is the Q&A happening in?
A good question. I don't know. I'd say it'll be bilingual.
Yeah. But let's say in the Colin Cuan instance now, were you talking with the Castas Gaeilge, or how
I
did you work from that?
was. I did it bilingually, but we just ended up switching to English.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just to get the whole audience engaged.
exactly.
Yeah. And so what how do you see that? Like, what's what is that level of engagement like that you see from abroad, Caoimhe? I mean, is there? Do you see? Do you see Irish language just usage growing and increasing, or is it a kind of an appreciation, or maybe just a greater appreciation of Irish culture, and maybe a little bit more? It's a bit more multidimensional and more nuanced than, let's say, the traditional view of Irishness, maybe from the US, or outside of Ireland. What's that like? I mean, is there a meaning? Do you see a meaningful engagement with the language that's kind of part of all that?
Absolutely. I see the community growing before my eyes. I've started working with a couple of people one to one just before the pandemic. They would have been coming to my classes. And then they continued with that, but they do Irish with me one to one once a week. And after a year, one of them went to the Gaeltacht, and she's more fluent than a lot of Irish people I know.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, what was so nice with her was that she's dyslexic, was told she'd never learn a language when she was in school. But she just persevered, and she was furloughed during the pandemic. She was working in theatre, so she had the extra time to spend on it. And other students have seen that have just really kind of thrown themselves into it and put on TG Car every day or a podcast or whatever. It shows that it's in an ideal world, you'll be able to go to the Gaeltacht and immerse yourself in it. But if you can't do that, you can still get to fluency by going to these events and watching and listening to the language. Another person I met at the Kneecap concert, I've known a while now, she teaches Irish up in Albany, Shoresheen. So she's been learning for 20 years, and now she's working as a translator, which is fascinating. She's doing a master's online with Maynooth. So there's a lot to be said, I think, since the pandemic, and even before that with these online courses, that you'll see Americans taking college courses in Ireland. They've already learned their Irish, now they want to keep passing it on. There's non-profits like Caoimhe Nic Giollarnáith that was started a long while ago. I don't know exactly, but at least 30 or 40 years ago by an Irish woman called Ethel. And it's where Irish is taught. The whole premise is that it's on a voluntary basis. They'll have weekends throughout the year, Irish language immersion weekends with a lot of people, over 100 sometimes, I think, and it'll be all ages. So there's definitely a lot to be said about that. A few of Americans who were coming to Ireland, when I did my master's, there was 2 in my class with fluent Irish doing Mastros New Gaeilge. So yeah, and that those numbers are growing. Like, I did the diploma in Múna na Gaeilge at the Caoimhe Fásta 2 years ago, and there was 4 Americans in my class. So I think there's really, you're going to see more and more people abroad learning Irish and becoming fluent in it. And I think at home it's probably already happened with Ukrainians and other immigrants that are starting to engage with the language.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you're absolutely onto something there. I mean, I've done a few online courses, a lot of online courses, but over the last couple of years since the pandemic, in particular, I remember there was one in particular. We were doing a Gaeilge tour, and I couldn't get over there was like Californians all over the US. There's one chap who was in Switzerland. There was people, there was another guy in Norway. There was, and the standard of their Irish was like sort of blew me out of the water. Anyway, you know, it was extraordinary.
Yeah, people find it intimidating. I've had people come to my intermediate classes that did Irish in school, and they last 3 weeks and they're like, I can't do this because the Americans know so much more grammar than me or whatever.
Yeah.
And I try to encourage them, and you know, it only happens now and again where they'll just get too scared, but most of the time they're fine then. But it's funny how when an American is starting with a clean slate, they'll progress so much quicker because how I approach teaching a language as opposed to how it was taught to me when I was in school. Like, we'll go through the gender of nouns and all of that so that as they progress, it'll make more sense rather than throwing that in when they're 17 and saying all of a sudden, okay, we have a Ferinch and a Bonich.
I mean, like, sorry, this has come up so many times, right? And it's now an official hobby horse of mine. But like, I got all the way through the primary secondary school system, and I actually then did a professional qualification in which you had to pass an Irish exam to get into it. And you know, 20 years later, when I went back to learn the language as a 40-year-old, I learned for the first time that we had feminine and masculine nouns in Irish. What? I mean,
it's because of how it's taught, you know. Like, I went to the Gaeilgeoir when I was 14, and it was a course specifically for people who went to Irish schools. And so by the end of that, I was very good at it. And then, of course, I forgot it by the time I was 17 again. Even though I knew how to use Tishleginduk, I couldn't explain to you why something was masculine or feminine. But yeah, once you have those tools, though, it becomes so much easier. Like, I remember when I was working at Rosetta Stone several years ago, I had someone from Ireland ask me why it's on tool. And when I told him, he was like, oh, that's simple. I wish I'd have known that before now. So it's interesting. Like, even then I was teaching, we were talking about, you know, Irish abroad. I was teaching Irish to someone in Peru. And I don't think they had any connection to Ireland that I'm aware of. I think they were just a linguist, you know. So that was really nice. And they had such lovely Irish.
Yeah, you know, I think there's a huge thing to be said for teaching Irish people Irish, you know, on the basis that we don't know any of it to begin with, because I think there's so many assumptions taken, and as you go through the system, then it's kind of there's this ongoing kind of progression. Well, you've had exposure to, you know, 5, 10, you know, 12 years of it at this stage now. You must know all. You've got to have soaked it all up somehow, but of course you don't soak it up unless somebody actually sits down and explains, this is how this actually works. Do you know what this is?
Exactly. And there's not enough time. Like, I'm teaching the Ord-Tesh syllabus at the moment to a diplomat's family. And I feel under so much pressure to get through all this stuff, which kills me because I'm used to having, you know, more time and freedom to really get into having fun and focusing on speaking it. And I can see how that's just not there. In the syllabus, and it's a pity because I know there's been changes made, and I can see that, you know, there's definitely some positives, but we're still not at the point where we're having, you know, 10 minutes of class or 20 minutes where it's just speaking in Irish and encouraging the teenagers to use what they've learned. And I wonder when that'll happen, because we were talking about it for so long now.
Oh, but even if you look at it, Caoimhe, I mean, like, if you know, I mean, like, I think about I don't know how many Irish classes, you know, you have in a secondary school here in a week. I don't know. Do you do?
I think it's 5 minimum.
5, okay.
Yeah.
But then there's 30 kids in a class. It's what is a class now? Is it 45 minutes or something?
Yeah, I mean, 30 is a lot.
You know, and I mean, how many minutes of Irish is each kid going to actually get to speak? You know, per class per week. I mean, so that's why I think this whole, we've been taught it for 14 years. God Almighty, we should be fluent is ridiculous, because you know the amount of actual time we've spent over that period of 14 years is pretty minuscule. I think if we got down granular and added it all up, so I think we should give ourselves a break in relation to it. But I am really interested in how the people who have been contaminated by the Irish education system are coming to the language and what their experiences of learning it now.
I think Americans just take it more seriously. I don't know. I think because this country is so focused on testing from a young age, you know, you talk to parents of 3 and 4 year olds and they're already focused on college. It's very different here. So I think they come with that attitude then that they have to be good at it. And they do wonder, well, why am I doing this class again? And I'm like, okay, this is how we wouldn't think of that in Ireland as being a failure doing a class again. We think it's normal as an adult. So it's a different approach for sure, but they definitely take it a lot more seriously.
Tell me, Quivijan, just as we to progress in that, what is, because I want to just touch for a moment, and just in relation to your sense of, and I want to move now towards maybe just talk about the future of the language and how you see that from where you're sitting now. But in that kind of, I would like just to have you any thoughts on, because one of the conversations that comes up here again and again is this whole question of the crisis in the Gaeltacht in relation to the language. And I mean, and I know that there's a huge international dimension. There's some extraordinarily positive things around that I'd love to get into, because I really want to focus on the positive aspects of it. But what's your sense of that in terms of the Gaeltacht and the importance of the Gaeltacht to the language, and to you, let's say, who's an Irish speaker in New York? Do you feel a connection there, or is that something that concerns you?
I am concerned, very concerned. But I see it's the same mistake we made over 100 years ago, and it's our approach and the government's approach to the revitalisation of the language and the growth, more importantly, because it has been revitalised. Now it's about growth and maintenance, and it's injecting money into the Gaeltacht. So I can see it being done, but then I'm also reading in like Tuairisc and stuff. I read an article yesterday about someone in her 20s having returned from Australia wanting to buy a house in Gaeltacht and trying to get a group of like-minded people together to kind of change things. And like, you know, if someone that comes back with savings and has a decent amount can't get a place to live that's affordable in
She's
the
living in
Gaeltacht,
in a van outside her parents' home. I mean,
yeah,
she can't have a shower, you know.
right,
I mean, because that article just really, really. I mean, I was just at times you despair. I suppose
right.
the inspiring thing about the article is here's this woman who's put it out there and said, "Hey guys, let's get in contact and let's put together let's get a movement going." So I think that was the inspirational piece of that article, I felt, you know.
Yeah, it was inspiring. And then the other side of it is, you know, I had someone who's not Irish, a friend, send me a piece by CNN encouraging people to move to the Aran Islands and you'll get a stipend. But the thing about that is, you know, you'll be given a grant to renovate a house, but you have to have Irish citizenship. They're not going to give you that. So that the downfall in that is you'd need to have that already. So those initiatives are great, but there needs to be more of that.
And I guess just to put it in context, people who are listening, and we will get links to these in the show notes. But the article from Church Study is Ask Gaeilge. But the thing about that girl who moved to New Zealand, she was a physiotherapist. She came back, had been in New Zealand, Australia, moved back to Cushfarg, I think, in the Connemara. And but I mean, apart from just, you know, not being able to get insurance on the van and stuff like that, she has saved money, as you say. But she came back, and I mean, the ability to get a mortgage as a single person, the deposit that you have to have, the multiple of incomes that you can actually then borrow to be able to buy a house, and then the prices, and then the ability to get planning permission. I mean, the structural issues that are there for young people generally in Ireland, it's a huge issue. But I think it quadruples down then when we get into the Gaeltacht.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are things that worry me myself if I ever wanted to move home,
Yeah.
you know, and also just, I hate to say it because I can see how many people at home are interested in language, but I do find here there's more respect in terms of, you know, what your rate is for teaching the language and that. That if there's just, I can see how friends at home are given grinds and that rate hasn't changed since I was 18, which is a long, long time ago. So, you know, it's interesting. But it's lovely to see, I work with so many adults that take time out of their day. They're come from so many different backgrounds. Some of them are like CEOs, some are retired, some are 20, 25, whatever. Like they budget to be able to work with someone like me once a week and get to the point where they can go to the Gaeltacht and come back then and have even more Irish with me. So I don't know, is it an economic thing too? I mean, things are really hard at home, that's for sure.
Yeah, but if you don't mind, if you're comfortable diving into that, I would really, because that is something that I would really be interested to explore in the context of that conversation, or that article we just mentioned, about this, let's say, the economic sustainability of somebody to, you know, have their particular qualification and come and she wanted to actually be a physiotherapist in the Gaelic, dealing with people in her native language, in providing them with their treatment. Um, and so that's about economic opportunity and the ability to pursue your economic opportunity in your native place, shall we say, is
Mm-hmm.
one issue. But let's talk then about opportunity to actually, let's say you're there now teaching the language. You're teaching the language in New York, and then they said there's varying different people, you know, and ways in which people are willing to consume that and pay for that. How do you see that? I mean, in terms of, is there an opportunity for, let's say, teaching the language as a for you as a career? Let's say that you could say that's what you're going to, you know, it's going to sustain you. What does that look like? Is that getting a full-time position in an educational institution, or are
Do you
there
mean in
other?
Ireland or in America?
Well, let's either of them. I mean, or what do you have a sense of? I mean, do you see an opportunity here at home to do that, or versus and what?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there's so many people interested in learning at home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I work remotely for Caoimhe Nic Giollarnáith and that, and I can see it. So yeah, I think the opportunity's there, but it's just like you said, the whole thing about, you know, the getting planning permission or getting a mortgage or whatever. That's where the obstacles lie. I mean, I have wait lists here for the last 2 years to work with me on a one-to-one basis. There's just so many people that want to learn. So, like, you know, I already make a living
Mm-hmm.
with Irish and a good one. So, you know, I think there's a lot to be said. Like I work with technology companies too. It's not just teaching, you know, where I'll be coaching people on how to speak the language and stuff like that for different projects. Or I remember a while back I was doing a voiceover for a project, and another one was doing the recorded message for a company bilingually. So it's, yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there. I was working as an interpreter in a court case the other day, because here you are legally allowed, they're obliged to give you an interpreter in your native language. So it's interesting. There's a lot of opportunities, and it's not just about teaching the language.
And how about then, in terms of looking at that with you, with a view to coming back to it? Do you, and obviously those whole questions around housing and cost of living and reestablishment, and you know, and it's impossible to not kind of to ignore those, of course. But let's just say, leaving those to the side for a minute, would you see a future for yours in terms of it? Is it would you see your future in the US and New York, or would you see coming back here?
It's hard to say because it really just depends on the opportunity. I'm lucky
Yeah.
now that I go home quite often,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I work remotely a lot of the time. So I'm very privileged to be able to do that. I would like to move home at some time, I think, but that could change. I mean, I'm really happy with my life here too. So it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to say. But
Mm-hmm.
I know that if I was to move home, I would still want to work with Americans and other people living abroad learning Irish.
Mm.
Because it's just so lovely.
Mm. Well, that is so interesting. That is such a great take on it. And so then, so we've, just as we come towards the end of the conversation, then and that's a perfect kind of inflection point there to talk about your sense, because you're listening to you, your focus is outward in terms of the language, and I mean that in the most positive way, in terms of projecting the language out there and connecting it with an international audience. What's your sense of the future of the language then? What's your, I mean, how do you feel about it? I mean, are you optimistic, positive, negative? You know,
I'm
what's your
very
take on it?
optimistic. I'm very optimistic. And I think it's, you know, as the academics will say, Dr. John Walsh and that it's in the, it lies with the new speakers, or what we call new Heinzuri. So those who are returning to the language once their kids are of school going age and they want to have some Irish to help them with their homework or that, or like people living abroad that are engaging with the language. And I think, like I said, again, it's to do with technology. I think a lot of young people that are on TikTok promoting the language have helped immensely. And Duolingo and all of these kind of things, and TG Car Player and that. So I'm not worried at all. I think it's just going to keep growing from strength to strength. I do hope that the government will pay attention to the Gaeltacht more and how to encourage people to come back and to settle there and to give them the resources they need. But I'm not worried about it dying in an urban setting for sure outside of the Gaeltacht.
Mm, mm. Well, that is an inspirational message from the point of view the new kind Tory, because I suppose that gives us all an opportunity to be part of that, because sometimes I think you're thinking, oh look, if you didn't win the kind of, you know, linguistic lottery of being a native speaker, then, you know, sorry about it, you don't get to kind of, you don't get to own the Irish language. But I mean, if the new kind Tory are the future, I think that gives us hope for us all.
Absolutely. They are without a doubt. And I'm grateful to them for that because I see it when I'm teaching people at home Irish. They don't seem to have as much of the baggage anymore. They're just excited to be there and ready to get stuck in and to have an opportunity to speak with other people that are in the same boat as themselves. And a lot of the time you'll have English people in the class or whatever, which is even better.
Mm-hmm.
Lovely to see that.
Mm-hmm. 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 And so finally, Kira, as we come to the end of the conversation, I'd like to ask you a question that I ask all of our guests, and that I'd love your take on it. It's really just to understand what, because I mean, you're somebody now who's you've come up from, you know, primary school, and from well, for pre primary in terms of your family background, all the way up. Continue the language was something that was centrally important to you, and then you continue that in your third level education, now obviously into your career. But what is it that motivates you in relation to the Irish language? What is it that drives you and has done you to do that? And what is your Irish language? Why do you do what you do?
What motivates me is, in my job anyway, is seeing someone connect with their heritage and their culture and see a different side to it and tell me then that they feel more of a connection and see them flourish. It's just so nice and rewarding to see them comfortably have a conversation in Irish in a setting outside of the classroom, or to come back from their second or third time in Ireland to tell me, this time I went to the museum and I understood the Irish bits written down. That is just, it's amazing to hear and to see their confidence grow. For me, on a personal level, it's just, I don't really think about it. It's just who I am. That's it. Irish is a part of me. And like I said to you at the beginning of this, it's a lot easier for me to express myself as Gaeilge than it is in English. And I think a lot of people can identify with that. And some of my students will say that too, which is interesting. Although they're American, they just feel this deeper connection to the language. And it's richer. And there's just so many more words there, adjectives that we can use that we don't have in English. Um, it's just how I was raised, you know. Like I found out recently that I'm related to Caoimhe Nic Giollarnáith, who used to go around collecting bailwages, and he was known as a judge in Galway. So I guess, yeah, it's that, and you know, being told that my my dad's aunt living in New York would always call home once a week to talk to my grandmother in Irish and things like that. So there was always this connection with keeping it going, and dad wanting to ensure that his kids could speak Irish.
Well, that is an extraordinary story, Huiva, and an extraordinary motivation. And the fact that I think that well, the richness and the severus that drives you to engage with the language, but more particularly, I think the fact that what inspires you to see that others being able to then participate and use the language actively, that is extraordinary, and particularly a whole new world of Irish language speakers and learners that you're engaged with there across the US and internationally outside of there. No,
Yeah, I think it's changing. We can see it already on TG Car, how there's different nationalities, ethnicities, and ages engaging with it. I think that's going to continue to change, and it's going to be so diverse.
Yes, I think the diversity of it is something that is, because I think we think of Irish as a, you know, at least one. It can sometimes be, particularly from people who are not actively engaged with the language, can see it as insular and, this is the big complaint that's made of the language often: dead language. It's historical. It deals with kind of agriculture and fishing and doesn't have any kind of relevance for the modern world. But that's just so. It's a completely vibrant, growing, and expanding language from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is. Like, even a few weeks ago, I was working with an Irish actress based in New York, and she needed my help prepping for an audition through Irish for a film. And when I read the script, I was blown away by it. So there's definitely something there. There's going to be a reading of Brendan Behan's play, The Hostage of Gaeilgeoir, on Gael that I'm involved with on November 30th with the Irish Rep. Again, we're expecting a big audience for that. So it's just interesting to see it so alive in this city when you hear the negativity at home sometimes about it. But again, you see it prospering at home. So I just think, I don't know, we have to just accept that it's not going anywhere.
Well, I think that's the absolute perfect note on which to end. Caoimhe a cara gur míle maithagat bunas an súb as an scéal a Ryan Tulin berbua agus benach de cara.
Gur míle mágad taim bhór an pleasure them é.
Thanks for listening. Gur míle maithagat as a bheith éisteacht. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would really appreciate your feedback and would be eternally grateful if you would follow, rate and review the show. Please also be sure to sign up at thelanguagequestion.com/resources to get your free valuable learning resources and to stay up to date with upcoming episodes, guests and to receive exclusive content. Slán tamala.